Let's talk about Oregon's mask mandate. We've been wearing masks for pretty much the last year and a half. In fact, Oregon is one of only a handful of states still requiring them. Tonight, a lot of you are asking, when can we ditch the masks for good?
When mandates are put into place for public health emergencies, they have to be accompanied by metrics of when they come off.
And speaking of masks, a small school district just got fined more than $10,000 for violating the state's mandate.
It certainly is the largest penalty we've issued over COVID requirements to a school district.
But they could appeal it, which is what most violators are doing anyway. And we know it's hard to keep track of everyone vying to be Oregon's next governor. So tonight, let's meet another candidate, State Treasurer Tobias Reed.
How are you going to raise not only your name recognition, but your identity with voters?
I'm not going to be the flashiest person in most rooms, but I'm okay with that.
Here's the story.
As you can see, we've got a lot to get to, but let's start with the video of the day. Coast Guard rescues out toward Oregon's coast, Tillamook County, specifically this video from the U.S. Coast Guard. Teams rescued 20 people by helicopter and boat from a flooded RV park. No reports of injuries that we have at this point. We've also seen flooding across the metro area, and we know these storms, for obvious reasons, are top of mind for a lot of you. And we have a ton of coverage at kgw.com as well as on our social media channels. Plus, our meteorologist will have the very latest on your forecast at 6:30. In the meantime, I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story, the show where we dive deeper into the issues impacting you day after day. And we use your feedback to drive our content. So please sound off. Email thestory@kgw.com. Use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW. Our team is watching for your questions, your comments, your confusion, your fury, all that good stuff as we speak. Let's get to our big story now and talk about COVID, masks, and the requirement that you wear those masks indoors or out regardless of your vaccine status. Oregon is one of 6 states at this point with an indoor mask mandate and one of just a few with that strict outdoor rule. And a lot of you have emailed and messaged us basically asking why. Barbara wrote, have you heard whether Governor Brown plans to update anytime soon regarding how long she will maintain the mask mandate? She added, it would be helpful to know the latest stats that drive her decision to continue. Barbara, great question. So here's the thing. Hang on to your hat. You don't have a hat? Get a hat. Hang on to it. It turns out Oregon does not have a specific, tangible set of metrics for ending the mask mandate. There's no tangible set of metrics at all. Pat Doris talked with an outside expert and a local county commissioner who say, yeah, we need that goal line.
Remember back in June when Oregon Governor Kate Brown declared the state open for business?
Oregon is 100% fully open.
It brought an end to most COVID restrictions because the state had come very close to hitting a key metric. 70% of people who were eligible for COVID vaccinations actually got the shot. That metric gave a clear target for the public to focus on and to know when the restrictions would end. Unfortunately, it did not last. The Delta variant soon took over and turned everything upside down. Oregon eventually put mask mandates back in place again for both inside and outdoors. But this time the state did not say what it would take to drop those rules. Do you think it's a mistake that Oregon doesn't have any metrics for getting rid of this mask mandate?
Yes, I think it's a mistake that Oregon doesn't have metrics.
Dr. Monica Gandhi is an infectious disease doctor and professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. She said a lack of metrics threatens the public trust.
It is imperative that we retain as a populace trust in public health officials. When mandates are put into place for public health emergencies, they have to be accompanied by metrics of when they come off and what constitutes a reason to come off. Otherwise, I am worried that it looks like restrictions without clean data-based metrics.
I completely agree with that.
Sharon Myron is a Multnomah County Commissioner and a medical doctor. She is also worried about a lack of clear goals for ending restrictions and thinks the outdoor mask mandate, which among other things requires masks anytime you cannot stay 6 feet away from people not in your household, that it has outlived its usefulness. Do you think that we should be dropping it now?
Well, from what I can see, when it comes to wearing masks outdoors, the evidence suggests if someone is vaccinated and they're in an outdoor setting, unless it's literally standing room only, there's a very low risk of COVID transmission, even when people are unmasked. So I would say, unless the state can show me the evidence of why they're not lifting the restriction, that it should be lifted.
The state did not have anyone who could go on camera, but state epidemiologist Dean Seidliger said a statement essentially saying that it's difficult to come up with specific metrics this time because the virus could change and is unpredictable. He said the Oregon Health Authority is watching hospitalizations for COVID, hospital capacity, and case rates, and that they need to go down more before restrictions are dropped. State Senator Elizabeth Steiner Hayward, also a medical doctor, thinks it is reasonable for the state to move slowly.
I think the state is being appropriately cautious to say, until we're confident that our immunization rates are high enough and our case rates are low enough, setting metrics may make people more careless.
Multnomah County's public health officer thinks it is important for the public to know what it takes to drop the mandates.
Yes, I do worry about that because I think the public deserves to have some sense of where we are and where we're headed.
Dr. Jennifer Vine said the hard part is coming up with those metrics, since breakthrough cases may elevate a case count, but those cases may be less severe.
I generally foresee continued use of masks through the winter. I do think that as we think about peeling back masks in particular, I think stopping outdoor use is a great place to start. Masks are much more important for prevention indoors, much less so outdoors.
All of which leads back to Dr. Gandhi's main point. Tell the people what it will take to end restrictions.
But where you lose your trust is when you sort of indicate that there's a prolonged public health measure restrictions without cleanly telling the population, when do they come off? Is it a vaccination rate plus a hospitalization rate? Is it linked to the availability of the child vaccine? Just give clear metrics. If we lose our trust in public health officials, we have a lot of other public health things that we have coming up that we need to trust them.
Pat Doris, KGW News.
So one more note on this topic, because as long as the state's mask mandate is in place, that means that OSHA can fine workplaces who either fail or refuse to follow it. And this week, they handed out a big fine to a tiny school district. It's in Eastern Oregon, specifically at the town of Adrian at the Idaho border, and the Adrian School District got hit with 4 violations. OSHA citing anonymous complaints of students not wearing masks. Most of these came with fines between $100 and $420, but one of them was a willful violation, and that means OSHA says they demonstrated either intent or purposeful disregard for requirements, and that cost the district $10,500. The district told us they are appealing those fines. And you may remember back in August, the Adrian School Board actually fired their superintendent, Kevin Purnell. Board members wanted Purnell to defy the governor's mask mandate, but he refused, and he was voted out. A new superintendent started just this week. Let's talk about the governor's race now. The primary is about 6 months away, and there is a bunch of candidates in both parties vying for the nomination. More than 24 people. Look at that screen. 24 people have said they're running for governor of Oregon. And a few weeks ago, we brought you a sit down with one of the many Democrats. This one was former New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof. So tonight, we're going to pivot to another candidate, State Treasurer Tobias Reed. He is also running for the Democratic nomination, and he's one of the more notable names in the race, along with Kristof and with House Speaker Tina Kotek. Pat Doris sat down with him earlier this week.
Why do you want to be governor?
I think we need steady leadership in Oregon to get past this pandemic and get us on the trajectory that we want to be on. Of course, that requires getting as many people vaccinated as possible and removing that as a barrier. I have a really simple way I think about how we should measure our progress. I want us to look at how our kids are doing. I feel like right now there are too many kids who are going to sleep hungry, who are dropping out of school, who think that there isn't any opportunity left for them, and that does not bode well for our future. So I think the steady leadership that can articulate a vision for Oregon that's based on making sure every kid has access to pre-kindergarten, a smart and effective, maybe longer school year, access to apprenticeships and vocational training, and an environment that has us on offense with respect to climate change, investing in clean energy so we can create jobs and be more resilient and protect this place.
How are you going to raise not only your name recognition, but your identity with voters?
I think we're going to focus on the things that we're doing in our vision for the future. I'm not going to be the flashiest person in most rooms, but I'm okay with that. I think the voters can see authenticity in people who are trying to be someone they're not.
So Reed also said his experience in state government gives him, he believes, a leg up. He was in the legislature for 10 years. He has been in the executive branch as treasurer since 2017. Now, we all know Oregon is very politically divided right now, and state lawmakers haven't really been getting along in recent years. That's putting it lightly. So Pat asked Reed how he, as governor, would deal with that.
So the governor for 2 different sessions has tried to get through cap and trade. The Republicans using the only tool they have, which is to boycott. If you're governor, how do you get past that?
I think it starts by showing up in other parts of the state. We talked at the beginning, I was raised in Idaho, so I've spent a lot of time going across the state, and I think being willing to go to a community with the humility of saying, I don't know everything about your community, tell me about it, let me into your head and understand your concerns and anxieties and hopes. I think when someone leaves a chamber like that, we have to look in the mirror to some extent and try to understand what has created the circumstance where they feel like that's their only option.
Pat's full interview with Tobias Reed is up on our YouTube page right now. We'll keep bringing you interviews with candidates for governor as we get closer to that May 17th primary.
Portland's police union has a new president. So what does he want to see happen with the Bureau? And what does he think of the mayor's new plan to pump millions into hiring more officers?
I'm encouraged that City Council seems to have recognized the need to reinvest and fully invest in a well-staffed police bureau.
We'll chat with him when the story continues.
Hey, welcome back. Keep sending those questions and those comments to the story at kgw.com. Why not? Adam did. He wrote, why does no one talk about the Portland Police Association? We hear about the Portland Police. Adam, thank you so much for writing in. We will note, actually talked about Portland's police union quite a bit, like a few days ago when a federal judge ordered the union, the city, the feds to come up with a detailed plan to implement a body camera program for officers. But to drill down on this topic, the PPA is currently in contract negotiations with the city, and they've just gone through a change in leadership. This is Sergeant Aaron Schmautz, a 17-year veteran of the Bureau and the brand new president of the Portland Police Association. He was sworn in last Tuesday, and earlier today, I got a chance to ask him a long list of questions. We will air portions of this over the next few days, starting tonight with kind of an introductory question. And a note, due to connection issues, Sergeant Schmautz offered to do this interview on his phone, which you'll notice he's holding.
Okay, Sergeant Schmautz, we really appreciate your time. The first question I just want to ask you, like we just said, you've been in this role now as president of the Portland Police Association for a little more than a week. Can you just talk about, you're stepping in at an incredibly pivotal time. So maybe what is your top priority right now? Or if you have a few, what are your priorities at the moment?
We're in the middle of contract negotiations, so obviously that's a very important thing to get done. There's a lot of work to do, and I think trying to find priorities, just what can we get done, and get all the way done. If we can get a contract settled and give our members some stability and some understanding about what working here is going to look like moving forward, I think that does kind of clarify for them how we get more people in as well. And I just think kind of rebuilding support for our members is the other big thing. The last year, it almost like it became kind of the in vogue thing to be looking at police as a problem or something else. The thing that's been difficult is two things can be true at once. You can have things that happen either in our community or in the country that are challenging and that we need to address, but also at the same time recognizing that police work is hard and that our officers here do a very good job. So I think, the tangible support when it comes down to just a financial contract, that's one thing. But also just when you have real kind of formative conversations with the public and again, understanding how our community wants to experience law enforcement, I think that you can kind of start working through that as well.
Now, as we said, we'll air more from this next week and dive deeper into why activists and why some of you have told us you just don't trust Portland police right now, like specific reasons. But tonight, I kind of wanted to shift to Schmautz's take on something really imminent, because this week the city council started vetting the mayor's fall budget proposal, which includes a pitch to funnel about $7.8 million into public safety. And a lot of that boils down to hiring more cops, at least 200 over the next 3 years. The mayor also wants to offer signing bonuses for some, as much as $25,000. And we're showing you this chaotic video because this comes after the city last summer cut a record $15 million from PPB's budget amid the ongoing racial justice protests. So before we hear from Sergeant Schmautz, I do want to play you a soundbite from this week's city council meeting. People against the mayor's plan at that meeting said that adding more officers won't necessarily fix, in their minds, Portland's gravest problems, like the surge in shootings. They argue other factors like the pandemic and increased drug use are fueling gun violence here in Portland and nationwide.
There's a narrative that is being fostered by some in our community that if we just increase the number of police officers in our city, we will immediately solve all the gun violence problems in our city. Such thinking fails to understand that policing cannot be effective without building community trust and support, as well as addressing the root causes.
So, that in mind, here is what Sergeant Schmautz had to say about the mayor's plan. And he started, I'll note, citing a need for confidentiality on some topics amid those union contract negotiations.
What do you think of the mayor's plan?
So you're going to hear me say it over and over again, and I apologize. I can't talk about specific numbers. I'm encouraged that City Council seems to have recognized the need to reinvest and fully invest in a well-staffed police bureau. Hiring bonuses or other things, all these different financials are consistent with practices around the country, and they're all ideas that are, geared towards getting more police officers to stay and to come.
Point blank, though, I have seen you quoted saying 800 to 900 officers over the next 5 years would be your goal. The mayor's talking 200 over 3 years. Is 800 to 900 feasible? Is that realistic, do you think?
No, what it would take to get that many people in, we would have to do a historic hiring binge and carry that over. We would have to have agreements with DPSST to get people through the academy faster. We would have to hugely staff and support financially our training division to get people up and going. But the reason that I'm saying that when I say that is because that is legitimately how bad our staffing has gotten. And that's, in order for us to be able to carry out the mission that we need to carry out, that is what the FBI says we should have from a staffing standpoint to support law enforcement in this community. So the reason I'm saying that is I want to make sure that as we're having real conversations about reinvesting, that it's clear to the community how far behind we are.
Again, much more from that interview with Sergeant Aaron Schmautz over the next few days here on The Story. Still ahead tonight, you had a lot of opinions there at home about whether teens convicted of violent crimes should get a second chance at life. So tonight, let's talk about brain development and how that is right now playing a role in determining if juvenile offenders should get paroled. We want to take some time now to revisit our big story from last night. If you missed it, we talked about how Governor Kate Brown is commuting sentences of more than 70 people. These are people who, as teens, were convicted of the most violent crimes, things like murder, rape, and assault. Now, this doesn't mean that anyone on that list will be released right away, but they will have the chance in the coming months to have their sentences reviewed. This comes after the state of Oregon changed the way teenagers are sentenced. For decades, going back to the 90s, they were tried and sentenced as adults for those violent crimes. But in the last couple of years, that began to change, in part because of research that shows teenagers are less in control of their actions than adults.
The science shows a couple of things. One, that young people are more prone to impulsive, high-risk decisions. We know that they're more vulnerable to peer pressure, and we also know that they have enormous capacity for change.
Again, this was our big story last night. You can watch the entire story on our KGW YouTube page right now, but we wanted to give you some of the feedback that we got, show you what we got in our inbox. Jack summed it up like this, quote, "Their brains aren't fully developed, and their ability to think through consequences and stop impulses to act is severely limited. Combined with the vast majority of criminals being victims of trauma, most of those kids can 100% be rehabilitated with a lot of therapy and ability to grow and mature." Now, we talked with Dr. Nick Sotelo at McLaren Youth Facility. That's where some of the male teenagers serve their sentences.
Had a young person who reached into a car that was parked on the side of the street, put it in neutral and pushed it down a hill, right? And that was a rush. And it was a big rush until at the very end, unfortunately, that car pinned somebody against a building. Now, that wasn't that person's thought about it, but we conceived that an adult might think, yeah, I probably shouldn't push that or shift that car in neutral, push it down a hill because it might hit somebody, right? That's thinking that we would attribute to an adult, consequential thinking. But a young person with his buddies are sitting there like, hey, let's do this, and not thinking about how this might actually end up being a really bad thing, and then being able to use that type of adult thinking to then stop the behavior in the moment, right? And that's something that, again, adolescence is a period in phase of learning by trial and error. And so that's something that the new statute requires, that in the review of the case and the sentencing process, that the young person's youthful status and actual status of brain development needs to be part of the considerations before sentencing is determined.
And so that's that doctor's opinion. Dr. Sotelo agreed that these kids can change in his mind, even if they did something awful. He says he's seen it happen time and again. But many of the prosecutors who work on these cases absolutely disagree. The Marion County DA talked about it with Laurel Porter on Straight Talk.
These are very serious offenses. These are not property offenses or public nuisance offenses. These are the worst kinds of crimes that one human being can commit against another.
It's a complex discussion, as you can see. You can watch more of this discussion tonight at Straight Talk, on Straight Talk at 7 o'clock right here on KGW. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com. Find us on social media. Use that hashtag, #TheStoryKGW. We're going to finish the show right after this. Quick reminder about the Hey Help campaign. This week, we're asking you to consider donating to North Star Clubhouse. They're a recovery program in Northeast Portland for people who have experienced a mental health crisis or are struggling with any diagnosis and would just, like to be around others who can relate. So to donate, hold your phone's camera up to this QR code. It'll take you to a donation page. You can also skip that pesky step and go to kgw.com/heyhelp. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW. Email thestory@kgw.com. Our team is watching for your feedback. That is the end of this show. We have Laurel Porter standing by now for the news at 6:30. Hey, Laurel.
Hi, Maggie. You know what we're watching. Flooding.
Absolutely.
And rescues on the Oregon coast. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This is KGW News.